Hello and welcome to this presentation where I'm going to talk to you about different training methods for your home workouts. So there are a number of different ways that we can train, and primarily when we're training in a gym, we are lifting weights, quite heavy weights, and we are challenging our body with those heavy weights in order to grow strength, grow stronger, get the muscle fibers stronger in our strength training. When we're at home doing the home workouts, then we have to adapt that somewhat in order to continue to progress with your training whilst at home, so that you don't regress or your training doesn't suffer and you don't become weak as a result, or weaker as a result of lack of resources. So what do I want to concentrate on mostly? Metabolic stress. So what we're going to look at primarily is what the problem is, okay? Most of the problem with your home workouts at the moment is going to be that people will feel like, because they aren't lifting heavy weights, that they are simply going through the motions of training. There isn't a firm focus or a purpose to the training, and people don't feel like they are progressing, or you may not feel like you are progressing as a result of just going through the motions. So when I say going through the motions, I'm talking about not pushing yourself with the same type of intensity that you are used to pushing yourself with at the gym, simply because the weight or the equipment that you've got isn't challenging you in the way that lifting heavy weights in a gym can. The problem with that obviously is going to be that you will regress. Your strength training starts to regress, your strength gains start to disappear. So everything you've done in the gym so far starts to disappear, and there's this regression in terms of your progress with your strength training. So obviously that comes with a lack of building on the stimulus. So you can, if you've only got sets of 4 kilogram weights and that's it, you're not going to be able to progress onto a 5 kilogram weight, because you simply don't have those resources available to you at home. And this is the problem that a lot of people are struggling with. They've got very limited equipment. So the way to go around this is to start looking at the different ways that we can train and get strong while we are training. So there are basically 3 types of ways that our muscles get strong, and we either grow our muscles from a hypertrophy perspective, or they simply get more dense and stronger, and we feel stronger as a result. So there are different ways that we can influence muscle fibers to change for the increase in strength, the density or the toning, or the size of them. So the 3 ways: mechanical tension. So mechanical tension is where we are looking at overloading your muscle with a heavy weight. We're producing this tension within that muscle or on that muscle that's going to cause hypertrophy, and it's going to cause eventual strength gains. There's also metabolic stress, which we're going to go into in more detail. So this is another way that you can influence the muscle fiber changes within your body, and also muscle damage. These are the 3 main ways that our muscles get stronger. So metabolic stress is the one we're concentrating on, because this is the one that's most available to you at home at the moment. So metabolic stress, if we stress our metabolism, then we are going to get strong. We are going to be able to increase our energy turnover, because we have stronger muscles which demand more from us in terms of our fuel that we put into our body. So you've heard me talk many times about getting stronger and how that influences on, for example, your caloric intake and what your body needs as fuel. The stronger you are, the more calories that your body needs on a day-to-day basis to do nothing, simply just to exist. So metabolic stress is going to help increase your energy turnover. So you're going to be firing up on higher levels, basically. This is done through increasing your hormone production. The hormones particularly pertinent to anabolic reactions within your body. So this is the muscle building, anabolic, the muscle building reactions in your body. There's going to be an increase in the hormones that stimulate that through metabolic stress. It's also metabolic stress going to tap into the higher threshold motor units that are simply not tapped into with when you're not lifting heavy weights. So when we lift what I mean by that is when we lift the heavy weight, quite soon after kind of 3 or 4 reps, then you start to get very fatigued, and every single motor unit that supplies that muscle is fired up so that it can absolutely have the best chance of lifting that muscle. You're putting the body under a lot of tension and a lot of stress. So by rep 8 and 9, you're really getting fatigued, but that muscle is working to its absolute capacity because all the motor units available to that muscle have been fired up. Unfortunately, when we don't have a heavy weight, it takes us a lot longer to get to that point where our motor units, higher threshold motor units, are firing up, because we simply don't need the amount of recruitment of them to lift a light weight. So it's only through metabolic stress, by training very, very high reps, that we eventually our muscle will get tired, and we will then produce higher threshold motor units getting into action. And this is what matters when it comes to building the muscle and getting it strong. We have to get that full motor units available to that muscle all fired up for it to make any significant change in the strength and size of our muscle. Okay, so metabolic stress. So there are a number of ways that we can make that happen. So I'm going to talk to you about a few different training techniques that you can use to create this metabolic stress, which is what we're looking for, to get all those motor units in that muscle fibre, that individual muscle fibre, everything firing up, so you are getting to the point where you are feeling that burn, okay? And that's what I'm talking about here. We're getting to the point where you're absolutely feeling that burn, and that muscles just give up. It cannot possibly contract another time, okay? So these are some of the different ways that you can do that. So some of them you'll be familiar with. So for example, supersetting. This is where 2 different movements are performed back to back without a rest. I'm going to go into it in more detail in a moment. So this, you can either train same muscle groups. So you're working on, let's say, for example, your bicep. It might be one particular exercise that targets your bicep, and then straight on to a different exercise that again targets that bicep muscle. So it's having double whammy, if you like. So it's being targeted in 2 different ways, but the same muscle. Or it can be 2 different types of exercises, so you're actually letting that muscle have a rest. So it could be antagonistic muscle groups. So for example, ones that are working on pushing movements and ones that are working on pulling movements, so that you're allowing this short period of rest between the 2 different types of exercises. Drop sets are when there's one movement performed for multiple sets. So you're decreasing the weight with each time, because you're going to work to failure. And as soon as you get to the failure on that set that you are doing, you're going to drop the weight down, and you're going to carry straight on with reps again until you feel that you cannot go, you've reached failure, and again you drop the weight down. And that's how you work through the drop sets. So you drop the weight all the way through. Giant sets are another way that you can target metabolic stress and metabolic training. So giant sets are 3 movements back to back, so very similar to supersets, but it's now called a giant set or a tri-set. So it's 3 or more movements, sometimes known as circuits, and they can be the same muscle groups or varying different muscle groups. Myosets or rest pauses. So these are where you do a really heavy set of reps, and then you have a very short break before, perhaps 10 seconds before you then go back in and do a few more reps. And then when you get to failure, you stop again for another 10 seconds and then you go again. So some of you will be familiar with this sometimes called a muscle round as well, okay? And then the final way that you can influence metabolic stress is through a rep target sets. So you're going to assume a target of maybe 60 or 100 reps of something, and then you go for that rep target. You can break that down in however you want to. So some of you have done this training with me in the past as well, so that might be breaking them down into sets of 20 or sets of 25 or 2 lots of 50 if you're going for 100 reps. So that's called a rep target set. Okay, metabolic stress strategies then. So we are looking for total failure, guys. We are looking for total failure where your muscle totally fails. You cannot go anymore. It's burning so much. You simply cannot lift another one. So we're going to talk about that in more detail. We're then going to come on to the incomplete rest or the rest pauses I've just touched on, drop sets and pre-exhaust. So these are all ways that we can stress our body metabolically. And those are the 4 areas I'm going to concentrate on those. So total failure, what I mean by this is it's not simply just gassing out or feeling like you've had enough, okay? That is not total failure. It's also not stopping because you're bored and you're just waggling this weight around. They are not total failure. We're not talking about psychological failure here or boredom. We're talking about metabolic failure, okay? So that's where you're taking the body to absolute failure. The muscle simply cannot contract any further. Incomplete rest. This is where you don't rest long enough for the metabolites that have built up in your system to clear. So these metabolites are the products in your cells, the chemicals that are and products in your cells that are building up in that area that you are training. And that's going to cause some lactic buildup, for example. These metabolites are what's causing us to feel fatigue, okay? So it's bringing all of these metabolites to the muscle fiber, causing this metabolic stress within that muscle fiber. So incomplete rests, if you're not giving the muscle the metabolites that have come to the muscle chance to clear. So when you start doing more reps again, you're going to get tired very, very quickly because there's already metabolites in that area that are causing the stress in that area to that muscle. So you then do some more and it's going to bring that fatigue up very, very quickly in that area. Once that happens, you can then access those higher threshold motor units, which we talked about before. So more motor units are then recruited within that muscle fiber so that the whole muscle is now involved, causing it great stress, which is what lifting a heavy weight under less repetitions causes. So rest pauses or incomplete rest, we've talked about briefly. So you're trained to failure, where you cannot lift another weight, is absolutely not happening. You rest for a very short period of time, 10 seconds, and then you go back in again and you train to failure and you repeat that. With your drop sets, then you're going to have the minimal rest there. So again, we're not allowing these metabolites to clear from the body, okay, before we're placing the muscle under the stress again, which is why we get tired very, very quickly then. But we have to have this very high rep range to get to the point where our muscle fiber is metabolically challenged. So it might be that we have to do 20 or 30 reps before we get to that point where we have reached failure. So 20, 30 reps, could be even more, could be 40 reps, who knows. You then reach that point of failure. Once you've reached that point of failure, it is only perhaps those last 5 repetitions within that range, out of all the 40 you just performed, the last 5 that are actually the ones that count and that are going to make some difference to the strength of your muscle. Pre-exhaust, this is where we are talking about pre-exhaustion, where you can fatigue the muscle before you actually concentrate on doing the rep. So that might be, for example, holding a push-up in a push-up position, holding it until failure, and then starting to do your rep ranges on that movement. Okay, guys, I hope that makes sense to you. It's just some information, so to give you some theory behind why you are doing what you are doing with me, and I hope you enjoy it.